We're going to get started and do our best with not much AV support quite yet, but a lot of what we're going to do in the beginning is describe some things to you. And so I don't know that we need the video to be able to do that. So what we're going to talk about today is first, congratulations. We have made it a very long way, and the team has spent the past little bit over a month putting a cap on a lot of the things that we talked about. So we've got finalized design, finalized guiding principles and project criteria. We have placed those into the evaluation rubric that we previewed last time and discussed at some length. We have completed the project reconciliation, the draft of the projects that appear in the 3 reports, and then inserted those into the rubric. And as the design team, we've performed an initial evaluation of those. So we've got all of that to discuss. Some of that we'll struggle to discuss too much without video, so hopefully we get there at some point along the way. Also need to talk about our 3rd public meeting. So what we had said to the public last time was that our 3rd public meeting would be a report out of all of what we've done and kind of present the outcome of y'all's work. So we can talk about that a little bit as well at the end. But first up is Allison to talk about the project reconciliation.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's happy to see all of you. So we're going to talk about the projects that we developed. We spent hours and days, Peter and I, scouring the reports, the master plan, the cultural landscape report, and the Midtown TERS, and pulling potential projects from those reports. There's a lot of great information. We are specifically for the project sheets, the projects that we're going to sample and run through the mechanism, looking for physical projects. So a lot of the, especially the cultural landscape report, have a lot of best practices that they recommend, goals, reports, surveys that they recommend to be completed. Those aren't actual like physical projects that impact the landscape of the park, right? So difficult to run those through this mechanism that we've developed. So the plan right now is we've got a draft set of projects that are physical, that we can develop physical sheets to run through the mechanism. An event scope, which I'll talk about. The rest of the like best practices, goals, those kinds of things will be kind of an addendum list to the project sheets that will still be included in the report, but not necessarily developed as draft projects. As things move forward post this exercise, you know, there could be a way to develop those into physical projects, but that's for future. So we're tasked at just looking at, you know, the exact physical projects that are included in these reports. So let's making sure I'm covering everything I wanted to tell you, because there's lots of good information. Also, the Brackenridge Park Conservancy has a very long list of projects. A couple of those overlap with projects that are listed in the 3 reports that we were tasked with reviewing. The ones that don't will be part of the appendix, just because we were trying to stick to our exact scope that we were tasked with. So the list of projects that we came up with right now, there's 13 projects. Some people may think that's a lot. Some people may think that's not enough. 13 came about because we combined a lot of the projects relate to each other. So we tried to be as efficient as possible and condense them as much as possible, because it's a lot of work to develop these projects into something that we can run through the mechanism. Because we're taking like maybe 2 sentences from a report that like describe a project and expanding it into a larger scope. Thankfully, most of us have a design background and we're used to thinking about these types of things and what would go into a project such as, you know, this 2 sentences that we've been given. So 13 was a lot, and we've made a really good stab at developing them and we ran them through the mechanism, which we'll talk about later. But I will also say that some of the projects that are listed in the reports are also part of other organizations' projects. So the first one that we'll talk about, for instance, is a SARA project. So there's some overlap. So we also probably need to discuss whether or not it's relevant to include it on the list as part of this. We did, some projects that were listed have already been completed, so we obviously did not include those. So it's just kind of giving you a little insight into how we evaluated things, how we pulled things out, how we tried to make them into larger projects. Okay, maybe it. Let's see. We talked about how we had to invent the scope, so you'll bear with us when we go through that. I think we're still working on technology, so I'm just going to describe the projects to you, so bear with me. Okay, yes, Joe.
So I know you did a lot of work and you've activated this mechanism and great. I am more concerned about how you turn it over, which is future state.
Right.
And how the city adopts it so that they use it going forward and it doesn't become something on a shelf.
Right.
So it's not in your purview, but I do want people to think about how they will move it forward. And I think even to the point of maybe us writing a letter to close it all out with our recommendation, suggestion, so that you have the power of this group when whoever has to go.
So the guiding principles and the tool will go to council for endorsement. And then the intent is that the stakeholder committee will continue. So like future projects will come for input from the stakeholder evaluation. So your job isn't over.
Okay, but yours is because you're gonna have to set a date, right, for council.
For sure.
They need to notify. You need to be there.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
So probably, I mean, we don't have firm dates yet, but I think that the desire is for it to be endorsed by council fully before the summer break. And so potentially there's a B session that might happen in, April, late April, I would say, early May, maybe, and then council, maybe late May or early June.
Okay.
And then as individual projects go for a question about funding, council, like that, that evaluation is getting packaged. So it's a story information. And again, so as individual projects are coming forward for a funding about, or a question about funding, so the council matures, it's going to be packaged with that evaluation of something essentially that doesn't have
Okay. And the other comment I have, and it's something to do with work here, is I went to the conservation website, I went to your website, and I went to the SAC stuff, and just say, that on your website, you have the letter goes on yours, you have the letter from Eric describing what you're gonna do, and we didn't do that. There's nothing on there. I mean, maybe if you just state that letter, but one of my concerns, and I maybe should speak to it,
I think there was some stuff.
is over communicating to the public. And I would put forth that maybe y'all should huddle and put some verbiage that kind of mirrors each other, because all three of those websites are different in what they say about this project.
Okay.
Okay.
So the other thing to note is that the project that we're about to review are not going to council as part of what council will be approving, correct?
Right.
Like individual projects that need approval by council for funding will go for the fund when that time comes. So they won't be approving this like. They'll be approving the principles and the way that they're evaluated, but they won't at this time be preliminarily approving projects until the scopes are fully developed.
Just wanted that to be clear, that what we're looking at is kind of just made up. It's a draft. It's like proposed that should be future developed into actual projects that have funding and just to be clear. Okay, so the first project is the San Antonio Riverbanks stabilization and restoration. So obviously that has a lot to do with Sarah, with their input, with the Corps' input. So it's a larger project than probably a city project and maybe doesn't belong on this list, but is included because it was in the reports, right? And it's a physical project that we all understand. Any questions about that? There's a whole, so I wish I could show you this, maybe one day. There's a whole project sheet. It has photos of kind of existing conditions and has some renderings from other reports that have been done in the past that we pulled. That's like, this is potentially what this project could look like. And there's a lot of text, and the text is meant to describe the project, to talk about, address the principles, right? Because we need information to pull, to go through the mechanism to say, does this project meet the guiding principles? Does it meet all of them? And then which of the criteria does it meet so that we can assign points so that we can prioritize projects, right? So when we get to that point, we'll talk about that more, but I think everybody kind of maybe understands that this project, the stabilization of the riverbanks, and I don't need to like read the narrative if I can, if people want me to. Any thoughts?
Does it end up with a score?
When it goes through the mechanism, it ends up with a score.
Roger, are you ready to try?
Okay. Okay, just yell at us, Roger. Okay, so I'll keep going. We'll see how far we get and we can backtrack a little bit so you can kind of see that. The next project has to do with historic structures in the park and doing an assessment and a full restoration. Now, there are a lot of historic buildings in this park. We lumped them together for this exercise, but obviously they probably would not be a project that goes together all at once, right? We need to develop what they're going to be used for. If they're not currently used, we need to develop strategies for restoration. So right now they're all grouped together for the ease and efficiency of this assessment and report, but they would all go together. We have a map that we kind of located all the historic properties. We have some photos. We've listed them out, kind of the ones that still need restoration and addressing. They are structures such as the bathhouse, the pump house number 3, the Inicio Rodriguez Bridge, the donkey path bridges, which I didn't even know where those were. So that was fun. Had to learn about those. The restroom buildings, the Josky Pavilion, the Kaler Pavilion, the bridge near the Kaler Pavilion, restrooms, the Campman House, the Campman House and pump house number 2 and the electric station number 2. So I would challenge, I think it would be a fun scavenger hunt to see if everybody in this room knows where all of those are, because I didn't know where all of them were until we dug into this. So the next project sheet, yes, sir. Hold on, I'm coming to you.
Okay, just so I understand, there's a bunch of historic buildings. You lumped them in one project for evaluation of their importance, but then they'll probably get broken back out as we actually go for funding. Is that how they? Okay.
Yes.
So this is more rating their feasibility as for the rubric rather than how they actually get done.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to know.
Correct, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, these are fake projects, but they're real projects, but they're not real until they get funding assigned to them. Does that make clear as mud? They're real projects in that they were listed in the report, but they're not real in that they haven't been officially assigned, funding, and it's happening tomorrow and it's going into a bond or what have you. Okay. Next project, Alamo Dam and Acequia restoration and interpretation. So this one is a lot about interpretation and uncovering portions that we can or not and how that happens. So there's a lot of inferring about how that will go forward, but that it's in progress too. Okay, so that's part of the phase 2 2017 bond. So in theory, that one's already happening. So again, whether or not we include it. Oh, the 2017 bond is the upper Labor Dams. I'm being told. Minute news. So this is separate. This is the Alamo Dam and Acequia. It's by the Whitney. Yes, the one where. Okay, so the potential, right, correct. No, the Upper Lamore is part of the 2017 bond project. So this proposed project is the Alamo Dam and the Sakia, which is in your backyard. It's not a real project. It's just a proposed project from the plan for restoration and interpretation of it. It was in the master plan. She said it's already been done.
Okay, sorry, thank you. We already have an interpretive dam there that we did as part of New Whitty. It was about a $2.5 million project. It also included the bridge that went across the river.
Okay, so,
It was paid by Bear County
okay, well, we will strike that from,
and Sarah.
that's great news. That's good.
It is, okay.
That's great news. It's already been done, so it's. Yeah, now we have 12 projects, everyone, in case you can count. The next project proposed by the plans is the Catalpa Pershing Channel restoration. So the big concrete ditch that goes along Avenue B, everyone's familiar. The goal is to make that more of a natural channel. So that's the project. The next project is also a quite large project. It has to do with the park edges, so the boundary of the park and entrances. The project is to revitalize these edges and improve the entrances so that you kind of know that you're at a park edge. Right now, at some locations, you don't understand that it's part of the park. And also, have better entrances so that you know that you're approaching and entering Brackenridge Park. So that's kind of the potential project. Like I said, very large, probably have to be done in segments if it becomes a reality. That's fun. The next one is connections to the neighborhoods. So generally, Jay's running up here.
I think we have screens.
Stay. Thank you again to the Witty for hosting these.
Roger, and I think that's Michael. Is that right? Hi, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Roger.
Okay. Oh, we have a view. So you can kind of see the project sheets that I was kind of mentioning. We've got a title, we've got kind of a narrative section. We have a map in this case. Sometimes we have photos, which you'll see. So connections to the neighborhoods. So the neighborhoods we kind of identified were River Road, Westport, Maggie Park, and Incarnate as the kind of surrounding neighborhoods. And how do we strengthen connections? Some neighborhoods have pretty good connections. Some neighborhoods have no connections. So the idea is that we want to improve those connections so that people have better access to the park from their neighborhood. Again, probably would be done in sections and not necessarily as one whole project, but just something to think about. And obviously needs a lot more development on how those connections would be made, where they would be made. These arrows are just generally showing you the to park connection and not necessarily like the exact location of the connection. Yes, Park.
I know we're just doing exercise here, but I would like to see Tobin Hill added on there. Yes. Part of Brackenridge Park is formally in Tobin Hill.
You're right.
We have $200,000 funding to improve Terry Court Park, which was like the 12th hole of Brackenridge. And so I would like to make sure that we're always keeping Tobin Hill in mind.
You're right. That is the one that we missed, so I apologize. We will add that. This is true. This is true. Very good point. And Monte Vista, correct. We will add those for sure. I have the clicker. So this is another one we need to talk about whether or not it needs to be included in the list. So originally this was a proposal for a new parking garage near the zoo on the SAISD property. Well, as you all know, we have a parking garage for the zoo now. It was not built on the property that the master plan proposed. But, so that's why we kind of kept it in as, do we need a second parking garage? I don't know the answer to that. But right now we have it in.
This project and the one before it, it kind of lends itself to a bigger picture, right? Before you do any of this, we need to look at, we talked about this early on, the traffic impact, right? And so, you know, as I look at these two projects, I think what we need is a very comprehensive traffic study that analyzes current traffic and future development in these corridors. So we can, before we build garages or make connections, we really know how we want to connect and what makes sense. So these are examples of projects that are still relevant, but bigger work needs to be done, or preliminary work needs to be done.
Yes, absolutely. So, Brackenridge, maybe. Oh, Avenue A, multi-use path. So this one, I believe, is maybe already in the works, as part of Sarah's projects, with that area, but maybe not. Yes, Brian Shea said yes. So the idea is to take out the asphalt paving from Avenue A, turn it into just a wide concrete path for pedestrians and bicyclists, and then also maintenance vehicles for the golf course and emergency vehicles, obviously. So it's to kind of take that area back and turn it back over to pedestrians. And, you know, this is one of the top burning areas along this section of Avenue A in the whole park. So there's proposed interpretation about the birds in that area. So I think it'll be a nice project. This project has been around for a while. These renderings came from a preliminary design study that was done for Sarah as part of the park segment of the River Improvements Project. So similarly, Avenue B revisions, the master plan proposed a directional change, which we talked about, Maurice, with you at the technical meeting. May or may not be a good idea still, but we included it just because it's in the master plan. So the idea would be that Avenue B would be one way from Mulberry to Brackenridge Drive. They're kind of across from Funston. And then from that street, Brackenridge Drive, to Toletta, it would still be two-way. So you would still be able to access the parking garage from either direction. The idea is to kind of slow traffic in this area. I think this probably would be lovely if it was done in conjunction with the Catawba purging project. So right there together. So just an idea. This one I think is pretty important. It's improving the perimeter of the zoo and making it more fit in with the park-like setting. Right now, there's a lot of edge of the zoo that's not very attractive, for many reasons, right? They're trying to deal with security and safety of the animals and the people. But we can do that in a more visually appropriate way. So that's this proposal. Yes.
Good morning. This in particular is going to be done in the current poly calendar year. Zoo will be taking care of that. That fencing you have depicted there. The project will be all the interior fencing, park interior fencing is what they're going to do, not the exterior. So that is still a TBD. I want to make sure that there's broad awareness that it is already a funded project and will be delivered in the current calendar year.
Say interior.
Interior, so when you think about the zoo school, I mean, really, you're already kind of in the park at that point. So you follow that down to Old St. Mary's and out, Old St. Mary's up to the pump house. All of that, that's all park interior. That is your perimeter. That is what's being replaced. Thank you.
Very exciting. Anybody else? Question?
Okay, so I am confused. Why are we including projects that are already completed or in process is this, are you trying to show examples of how a project is presented?
Yes, and these are projects that were proposed by the plan that we did not know were in progress.
Okay. Or done.
Or done.
I mean, because the garage, you're saying the garage is done, but I think what you were saying, Terry, is, well, we may do another parking situation. I'm just trying to figure this out.
I just want to be clear. What I'm saying is, as I look at these projects, 2017 master plan, yes, some of them are done. But now we're more informed about other projects that, say, the Sunken Gardens Theater, right? Before that gets done, we need to look at traffic circulation. So when she was bringing up several of these projects, the first step is to look at our broader traffic situation, Avenue B. Let's restudy that. So it's doing a very comprehensive traffic impact analysis to see what's happening in the area before we do any of these projects. That's what I'm saying. And these projects are dated because the master plan was how many years now, you know?
Yeah, 2017. So we're learning things today. That's why this group is so important. Moving forward, anything that actually becomes a project will come to this group first to be run through the rubric or through the mechanism. So, because you all have knowledge of different things that the designers won't necessarily have, right? Yes, Sarah.
Can you just take a second now that we have a visual to kind of walk through what you talked about and what each score is and kind of why things are on the page?
Yes, so it'll be a little bit easier when we get to reviewing the mechanism. So the idea is that the narrative text is gonna speak to the various guiding principles. So when you go through the mechanism and you read the first guiding principle on the list, you say, okay, based on the information I have on this sheet, which does it meet that principle, right? I'm thinking, based on preparing these myself, that projects that actually go forward are going to have to be more than one page because there's a lot of information to cover between the principles and the criteria that just can't fit on one page. So anyway, side note, but yes, you will go through those guiding principles and say, based on the information I have as a stakeholder group, does this project meet that guiding principle? Yes or no? If it does, and it meets all of them, then it moves forward. If it doesn't meet one of them, goes back to the design team and says, you don't meet all the guiding principles. If it meets all the guiding principles, then it moves forward and it gets evaluated based on the criteria. And that's where the points come into play. So we have certain things listed at the bottom, like type of project. Is it a restoration? Is it new construction? Is it a demolition? So just kind of highlight different aspects of the project that may or may not have been done. Has the traffic impact analysis been completed for this specific project that you're evaluating? Yes or no? Has a landscape plan been done? Yes or no? Ideally, all of the answers are yes, so that you guys can fully evaluate them, right? If they haven't, there's going to be a lot of information missing. Has an ecology assessment been completed? These are all very important things, right, to developing projects that go into the park. Does that help, Sarah? Okay, thank you. Okay, Sunken Garden Theater. Terry foreshadowed this one. Obviously this is a very important project. We need the Sunken Garden Theater to be reactivated a little bit better and plans are already kind of underway for that. So hence it's still included. Whether or not it passes the evaluation, we shall see. A new playground, there's a proposal for a new playground or a naturescape using natural elements to get kids more exposure to the outdoors. So this is a photo of an example of one that we found online that we thought looked like it could fit into San Antonio. You've got locations for existing playgrounds. Right now, the master plan proposed that the new playground be by the zoo. I don't know that I agree with that. There's a lot of entertainment going on over by the zoo that is happening. So I don't know. That's another discussion for future, but. It's not. I mean, this is just from the 2017 master plan. So it's, yeah, all of these projects came from the various plans that we were tasked with reviewing. So, right.
Quite a little bit of.
Sure.
Context. So you're correct. This is the 2017 master plan, and I believe the team that led that effort at the time when that was part of the plan, it was in the general vicinity of where zoo parking is. And I think specifically at the time, and very clearly you see where I think there was a general idea of where the parking garage was going to be, and now it's not. The recommendation, to be clear, is not that it be a playground within the zoo leased premises. I think this is speaking to, through that community input process, there was identified opportunity within those spaces that service the zoo. And we know probably outside the parking garage, the other biggest space is going to be that surface lot. And so I just wanted to provide that additional clarification. And I'll leave it there.
You can see the challenges that we faced as we've gone through these, because a lot of them are very outdated and or have happened. Or, and you know, think about the list that we already were aware of what had happened. So kind of going through it, it's a challenge. That's why these are not projects that the council will approve. This is just to help us make sure that the mechanism works and that we can all move forward with it as a group. So one of the next projects is the Alpine Drive, making that a multi-use path. Right now, it's just kind of in a neglected state, a lot of overgrown landscaping. There's these really cool stacked boulder former light fixtures that would be really fun to reactivate and restore. So lots of potential with Alpine Drive. I think you get really great sweeping views of the park and the Japanese tea garden. So there's lots of opportunity for interpretation. Also interesting to note that as you go along Alpine Drive, you go through different landscapes, right? You kind of got a more low landscape, and then you kind of climb into the trees. So that's another interesting point for interpretation potentially. So lots of opportunity on Alpine Drive that I think would be lovely. That might be the last one. Oh yeah, that's 13. So we've hit the end. Now, Jay, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Switch over to Excel, his favorite program. So this is going to be very hard to present. We're just going to talk through it. It's obviously something that as the evaluation proceeds, you've got to sit down with it and really spend some time going into depth. So I'm going to hit some high points. You're probably going to see portions of the evaluations that you disagree with. That's good. As we've talked about from the beginning, this is a very subjective process, which means that there will be disagreement. So just going through the guiding principles, and I'm going to reemphasize something that Allison said. A lot of this had to be invented. So we had 2 sentences out of the master plan, if even that, calling for a project. Well, that says nothing about what the scope of the project really is. So we've had to take some liberties here, and the liberty that we took, which we think we've got good, strong guidance from you as a group and also from the public, is that as the scope of these things gets fleshed out, they need to be reflective of the criteria that we developed. So you're going to see in the guiding principles in particular, it is possible to scope the majority of those projects such that they do pass the guiding principles. We do have one in here over on the right, I think 7 or 8, that does not, in fact. That's the new parking garage. That potentially doesn't meet all of the guiding principles. Not to say that it couldn't be reshaped so that it does, because it likely can. But the nature of a project like that is more difficult to achieve on park ground. So we've got yes, no, and neutral. Neutral meaning, you know, that's not something that really relates to this project. It's not a yes or no. That allows a pass as well. Selena is showing us here. This spreadsheet is fabricated so that you are on a directed path. You can't type in your own answer. You have to choose one of the ones that we preset just to keep everyone on track. So maybe let's go on down to the prioritization criteria. So this is where things get interesting. So again, these are developed out of everything that we heard from the public. Those are the finalized lists that we talked about at our last meeting. Again, same deal, yes, no, or neutral. In this case, we're actually scoring. The first part, the guiding principles are a gauging mechanism. If you get a no, you're out. If you get a yes or a neutral, you get to continue. So these are just the projects that meet the guiding principles. And a yes here gives you 1 point. A neutral doesn't give you anything, it's a 0. And a no, if you don't meet one of these prioritization criteria, then you get a -1. And that affects the totals. You can see the total score there, and you can see how it changes as Selena changes that. And then the line above that, you see the green shades, the 3, the 8, the 10. That's the actual ranking. It's taking the scores and ranking them against the projects that we've got populating all of these fields. So with all of that said, if you've thought through this and started looking at this, what you're going to see is that the projects that receive the highest prioritization rankings are the ones that do the most to achieve all of those criteria. I would point project 4, the Catalpa Pershing restoration, as one of those. Yes.
We're at like 22, 23.
The question was how many criteria? I think it's 22, 23. I'm not too sure. We've got, and Selena, if you want to scroll down real quick, you can see it just keeps going. So there's quite a lot. So back to the top line there, the rankings. Projects which can positively impact nature tend to receive higher rankings here. And that is something that's built into this because it's what we heard from you, it's what we heard from the public. So I think to that extent, this is working the way that we intended to. But I would also say, this is the flip side of what I said before, as projects are scoped more fully, and part of what we're doing here is creating a description for how projects must be scoped fully in order for this to work. So if someone comes forward with a project proposed, they need to develop all of that information so that it can be evaluated against this rubric. Part of doing that means that projects going forward are going to be different than they were in the past. Because to get a high score here, you need to do certain things. So I think that, and we've talked about this before, this rubric is working in 2 ways. One, it's helping to bring forward the projects that match all of this better, but it's also helping to shape the projects that get proposed. And it's also, I think, this is a big positive for the park in general. It's going to help people understand how a project needs to be fully described, how it's scoped, which is going to, I hope, reduce some of the issues that we've had with public engagement in the past, with folks unhappy about projects because they feel like they weren't completely described, and a complete description leads to issues down the road. Maurice.
Mock-up, right, because there's a million neutrals here, so that it doesn't seem very helpful in terms of the criteria, fulfilling the criteria. You sort of just made all this up, right? I just want to make sure of that, but I assumed that the project leads would fill out, they would fill out the criteria and then present it.
Yes.
And justify it, but there's no there's no grader on the team, right? We would present the project.
Correct.
And fill out the criteria.
Correct.
Yeah, and somebody can challenge that, but nonetheless, yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah, so I will say that the project team has put together what you see here, but this group are the reviewers.
I think it's worthy saying this again, as we're working through this, right? This has been, I have a political science degree. This has been the science of muddling through. Okay, read that book. Anyway, so if I'm gonna, let's just elephant in the room. If I'm gonna try and develop Sunken Gardens, there's things on there that have to change, right? That under the current situation, there's things that have to change. So I would need to mitigate the neutrals by making changes. I would then score that. And then the desire is to continue to have a stakeholder advisory committee moving forward so that you as the reviewers would then challenge conservancy and make sure that we're in sync before it would go for funding to TERS, bonds, whatever. Is that, and public review, first public review? Is that clear to everybody? Because I think this is really important where we are right now. We're at this tipping point in this project.
When we go through this process, we're individually going to rank it, or is it groupthink in this whole committee deciding yes, no, or neutral?
We should talk about that a little bit right now, in fact, I think. So I think what you're asking is a basic question about consensus versus oppositional committee operations. I would say that generally, by and large, consensus is a better way to operate. Certainly, we have operated by consensus to this point. I think the committee needs to decide what the route forward is, and I think there's probably a way to blend the two. You hadn't had this information prior to this meeting, for example, but if we were going into an actual evaluation, I think probably the right way to do it is for the organization that's proposing a project to give this group the information about the project that they need to make that evaluation. So you've got some time to sit down to spend.
My understanding, as of the projects, people who are creating projects would evaluate it and present it to the stakeholder, this group. Now, there may be, some challenge on 1 or 2 criteria, but the criteria should be listed by us. The committee doesn't do the criteria.
We're all saying the same
I
thing.
don't think we are.
Okay, so where's the disconnect? We, as an agency, would use the criteria that was established and approved by this committee and the public. And then we would fill it out. And then we would come to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and we would defend my proposal. We would inform, but defend our decisions because you're going to have questions. Right? And then we come up to a consensus. Does it need to change? Now, that's how I see it. That's not what you're thinking, Marisa?
So that's what I think, that's not what we said here.
Right.
Yeah, he's Joe.
Yeah.
Right? We're saying, no, we don't have right here. Or,
No.
well, yeah.
No, I must have misunderstood that. No,
So the
Stakeholder.
good, that's a great distinction because whoever's presenting is going to say, hey, we're at a, whatever it ends up being a 10. And then you're going to have to defend that as we go through it and say, no, you need to take that out. It's a no. But it goes back to all of us we don't get a blind, like, no, I get to put up there. And then we all reveal it and it's actually a no from all of us because we all did it individually. It's a group thing as we discuss it and decide yes or no, it's going to be a no. Or yes.
So I think what we're all saying is that there's a starting point established by whoever is carrying a project forward, the stakeholder. And then as a group, there's that starting point from which you discuss. And perhaps there's some tweaking and fine tuning. That is the role of the committee, but not establishing.
But as a group, like we do now, to discuss.
Right. But
I think the concept we're on the same page about, but we really, really need to decide on a process ahead of time and whether information is going to be shared. I don't think it will be productive to do this unless we know that we have a system where if a proposal is coming forward, everyone in the stakeholder advisory committee gets whatever the, baseline agency review information is well in advance. Like we can't just see it for the first time at a meeting like this and then come to a consensus and have it be productive. So making sure whatever that process is written down, that we also have an opportunity to provide feedback on that and make sure it addresses what we think is appropriate for public participation principles and the values of this group and is feasible for us all to manage, I think is something we need to spend time on as well.
I think that's a really good point. I would say that part of our report, we've already started these things like what shows up on those project sheets. We're gonna codify that within the report. And I think exactly what you talked about needs to be in there as well. And so we can start generating that material and send it to this group for discussion, review, that kind of thing.
And I think you were talking about this as part of the consensus. So project one comes and says, yes, we need the project balance of ecological and natural resources. But Joe and I think it's a no, and the rest of you all think it's a yes. What is there a process for us to resolve the fact that we just don't, we both think it's a no, you all think it's a yes. Is the end result majority says it's a yes? Or how does that process work?
I expect in reality, it would be. And the ideal is with a consensus, operating by consensus, you don't have to take a vote, but that is always the fallback. And you can fall back to Robert's Rules of Order if necessary. It's possible that the committee might get there at some point over the years, but I think that's the only feasible answer. It's mandatory.
It seems to me too that maybe on some of these more technically skewed projects, some people's votes would count more than others because they would have more expertise in that area. Like, I don't know from hydrology, but I might know something else. That's just a thought, but that really would complicate things.
It would, and I might suggest that a way to accomplish that without having to weight votes, which gets to be a very tricky thing, is that we continue to have our partners available at these meetings. Because I know, certainly I don't know hydrology from as much, so I'd be very inclined to listen to the folks who do, and that would certainly guide my input on information like that.
So going back to having information ahead of time, and I think of Allison that had said, there's gonna be more than one sheet for these projects, right? So like the way, as somebody that writes lots of grants and has to justify things all the time, like there would be each guiding principle, whatever it is, like there's some narrative that defends why it's a yes or no from the project that's coming forth. That we would be able to get ahead of time to see, okay, and then they present it and say, okay, this is why we said all this. And then we have the opportunity to agree or disagree or go through it.
I think we're all on the same page there.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I think that's where, like, if I don't have a PhD in hydrology, there's an explanation there that kind of explains why it was a yes or no.
We probably need to better define, how many people are on this advisory committee and decide if there needs to be a quorum for a vote. Robert, I don't know how we can move forward with disagreements without a vote, and let's just do it democratically and follow Robert's rules. I think that there's been inconsistent participation on this committee. Some people show up, some people, it's been a revolving door, I feel like. So if we could better define, like, how big do we want this committee to be, and then making decisions if we oversize it, is that, oh, yeah, if we make it too big, it's gonna be hard to get a quorum. And how many are actually on this roster?
I don't remember the number offhand, but the membership is set by the city manager. I mean, that's outlined in the memo from last summer. So I think the number of people in the membership is clear. And I don't know how personally I feel about quorum. I mean, it is it's a stakeholder advisory committee, and some people, depending on the project, may decide not to come. They may not feel like they're that invested in that particular project. And I would hate for a project to be held hostage because not enough people came to the meeting. You know what I mean? So I think we would need to think through that before we made that a requirement.
Yeah, I think that's, we could get a definition on how many people are part of the advisory committee. And do we need, 25 people weighing in, or could it be a smaller advisory committee?
I just think to go along with my point about process and information sharing stakeholder advisory committee, building on what Parker just said, like, there isn't really, as far as I know, a great, like, formalized process list or rule book that we have for how we operate right now, and that would be helpful. And would clarify some issues that I think we've had with making sure we have participation, what that means. I think, some of the language we're using sounds scary and draconian, and I know, like, is triggering me, would potentially trigger community members. So I think we can resolve all of that if we, like, spend some time working on process and clarifications of, like, and expectations for the group. And that's something that we should prioritize before we move forward with, like, project review.
I know, well, first of all, I guess the stakeholder group is finalized already, so yeah, it's not gonna change. But when we did the River Site Committee for, under Sarah for 14 years, it was consensus, except if there was a split and then there was a vote, and it worked really well. I think that's one of the models you're using, right? So it was a huge group. 30 or 40 people.
Yeah, that is absolutely one of the models that I've had in mind the whole time. Yeah.
Earlier on, we had sort of developed these subcommittees around the different areas, and in the public process, we sort of staffed those areas. I mean, are we going to bring that sort of subcommittee structure forward? Would that help in this process?
I think it's worth talking about. We have talked about that on the project team side a fair bit. Where we stand right now is that, at least at the point we're in right now, I think it made sense to get the whole group back together to talk about exactly the things that we're talking about right now. I could see a situation where the committee as a whole, at some future date in project evaluation, determines that there's a more efficient way to deal with. I'm going to be honest, that's kind of unwieldy. It has to be. So there could be more efficient ways to deal about it. I think having that unified consensus is important. So probably you come back at the end and all look at it together. That's the committee's business.
My comment was, well, I'm on land, but I'm also adjacent to the park. And so if something with traffic comes up, I want to vote. Right?
More thoughts? Yeah.
It's the preview to the public meeting.
Good segue. Is this the preview to the public meeting? And take two deep breaths real quick. So I think that let's talk a little bit as a group about what we want to accomplish with the public meeting and what we have said to the public that we'll do in this last meeting. I think basically what we've said is you as the public have given us a tremendous amount of information that has shaped in minute detail what it is we're looking at here. And so something that we specifically need to do with the public meeting is show how that works and show the end product and talk about process a little. One of the questions I've got for this group is whether there are additional things that you think from your perspectives as representative of these groups that third public meeting needs to accomplish.
So I would recommend not using real projects to the point of like, making it even animated of making the grass purple or what, so they keep, because even in here, you started getting people raising their hand about a particular project. We have memory and history. So I think create something completely different and introduce this earlier, because you're leading up only like the finale, but people's heads are not getting around. They're still stuck on the project before you get here. So I would, that schematic that you did where you have the criteria, the guidelines and the criteria go across, I mean, really handhold them through and create some project that will never, ever happen, that's animated almost, so that people don't pull information that bits and pieces they know. I mean, you say trees and people freak out. You say, a wall or whatever, they're going to start raising their hands and asking if that's real and all of that other stuff.
I would kind of second that, and then maybe even thinking about project 1, project 2, project 3, and just have a sample like that. So there is no description about it. It could just be even numbered projects to show how the mechanism works. Yeah, so it's totally anonymous and people aren't getting caught up in that.
Okay. I think that makes sense. Thoughts from anyone over here?
You know,
What are you gonna ask the public to weigh in on at the third one? You're really unpacking it for everyone. So how do you put a bow on it and say, thank you for coming? We don't need any more input.
So I think that until we have a final adopted report, there are opportunities for input. It's just that what that input is about is pretty constrained because we spent all of this time getting to a certain point. We're not going to reevaluate with the public what the guiding principles are, for example, because they have weighed in on that already.
Would you move everybody to say, going forward, just go to SA Speak Up and we'll have information there? I mean, think about what, so they can go home and think, well, we still have an opportunity to tweak something or share something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not there's no point in having a public meeting that doesn't ask for feedback. So let us think a little bit with the top strategy folks, with Rachel, about what that is. But yeah, we will figure out how the public can best offer feedback and what parts of this process they can still affect.
I think another goal to keep in mind, like as people go home after the meeting, is they will have a new understanding of what to expect for future projects. Like here's kind of the outline steps that will take place. Here's all of the ways the public will be invited to participate. Here's how the Stakeholder Advisory Committee will continue to meet and evaluate projects. So I think having that clarity moving forward is also one of the goals.
I would also say we should work out the process details for the committee before this public input meeting, because I anticipate there will be questions about that.
I think, given the timeline, we don't have the third public meeting date set yet, right? Not set. We have other timeline factors.
We're talking about April 9th, I think, right now. Jamie made a face.
Wednesday. Wednesday, on the 18th. Yeah, so when do they work with us? Amazing to be born. The second grade.
Yes, which means that we need to give you information very quickly.
Jay, a question. Is every project coming up going to go for public opinion?
I think so. I mean, that's kind of outside my area, but I think it needs to.
Well, and that's to some level, each group is responsible for their own input. So city projects for sure, like we're going to have a defined process for how the general public gets to comment. But I think we're going to encourage our partners developing projects to do the same.
I think one of the things that I learned here in terms of public input, and I don't remember who said it, but don't bring us a baked project. Maybe it was Joe. Can't remember.
Probably.
And so as I think about public input, it's kind of reshaping the way we've done it. The city's done it in the past and how we would move forward, but definitely, having a very comprehensive thought out, bringing something forward. Maybe it just starts with that project sheet, and explaining the criteria. I don't know. I would like to get feedback from folks. I think this stakeholder group has been so helpful in terms of public meetings, coming back here and saying, here's the project. And this is what I'm thinking about how to roll it out to the public, give me feedback. But those are my thoughts.
So I kind of think of this in terms of if I were a designer and I were helping structure the public engagement for a particular project, and there was a process like this in place, we know what the public has said because we asked them, and we can say what they have said. Over 2,000 respondents to a survey. which really helps to predicate how you put together that presentation for public engagement, because you can spend a lot of time saying, this is what you told us, and we heard that, and this is how the project has been shaped by that. And see, Bill, I think.
I think the final meeting should be, this is what's going to council and hard stop. And if they, and what that process looks like for the public and how they can share their feedback to council. If they have disagreements and that there'll be no end if we just continue saying we're gonna take the feedback and reevaluate and all that. Like, we need to have a hard stop, this is what's going to council.
Great comment.
You mentioned design professionals, so my question is, how is this information provided to them? As an entity is starting to engage them in the process, but they need to have this in the very beginning, so that they're not developing their proposal ideas without all this information. So, sort of how does this start from the beginning and make it all the way through?
That is a great question. So this will be a report stepping through everything that we've done here, but upfront talking about here's the end product, and here's how we think the process goes from here forward. Here's the template to use for these project sheets. Here's what the rubric looks like. Here's how it operates. So that all of that is laid out. The rules, essentially, this is the rule book for doing projects in Brackenridge Park in the future. All of that is laid out upfront and very clearly is how I think that needs to go together.
Yeah, no, that was a really good question. I mean, if the project, kind of is either shovel ready or it's up baked, right, in a sense, but it's shovel ready, it's fully prepared. And it goes through this criteria. And the stakeholder committee, says, well, what about this? Or, has a conversation, which is critical. But then my understanding is it goes, and maybe it's wrong, goes to the technical committee and that goes to council. Is that correct, Shannon?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the technical committee definitely also weighs in throughout. And, we also can't forget that if, projects in Brackenridge Park are going to go to HDRC, they go to council. I mean, there's a lot of other opportunity for public input even beyond the stakeholder. Yes, yes. Make sure that they understand what the process will look like. Yes.
How long is your tenure? Yeah. Also,
So I on this committee forever. It's like, let's talk about process. And then if people do want to give feedback in the future, if they want to serve on the committee, what does that look like?
I mean, as of right now, the membership is established by the city manager. And if an individual person decides that they're no longer able to serve or whatever, then that communication would go through the city manager's office. And like in the case of a neighborhood, for example, it might be that there's new leadership in the neighborhood. And so the rep from that neighborhood changes, or because everybody's representing like an entity or an area of expertise. And so the city manager's office would make that determination if somebody was no longer able to serve.
we're coming up on time here. Any other thoughts before we call it for the day and start work on lots of stuff that we need to do very quickly?
Process as
So that's our homework, but if you've got specific thoughts, I would encourage you to send them to Corey.
and then
So that you can get them.
how do you present that back to us?
On the timeline that we're talking about for the public meeting, we need to do that electronically.
Okay.
As a request, like, not the night before, like, we were like a week minimum probably for us to review, which I think we're at like 3-ish weeks between now and April, and I think that's the meeting, that would be helpful. We do report, especially for neighborhood folks, like we're here representing other people, so there's like processes we have to follow to do this, well, and make sure there's,
What we talked about just on the side here is maybe April 9th for another meeting of this group. And then the following week for the public meeting. So that I think that's pretty similar to what we did previously. Just so y'all can have a chance to discuss, affect precisely what we present to the public in that meeting.
On the night.
Yeah, before that, but yes. Get my calendar.
Got it up on the screen, Jay.
My calendar?
Oh, fun.
Okay, sounds good. Let's do it. All right, more thoughts? Yes.
Did know all of them, but which ones wouldn't have gone forward?
So the only one that, and again, this is fabricated, so the answer to your question can't really be a real answer, but the garage didn't meet guiding principles. So it didn't go through the criteria evaluation. Things that scored well, if you could pull back down just a bit, Selena, we'll look at the project rankings for the ones that did go through the guiding principles right there. So ranked highly was Catalpa Pershing. The stabilizing and habitat restoration on the San Antonio River did pretty well. Park edges and entrances did well, and I think that's because it could potentially as well have a lot of habitat restoration potential. The multi-use path on Avenue A did very well, and I'm going to hand the mic off to Allison.
Well, I'll just say, as the person who was working on creating the project sheets, it was very enlightening when I tried to run it through this on what things I was missing describing in the project sheet that would have helped me pass all of the criteria. So the reason we just kind of left the parking garage is because when we first went through it, it was like, oh, there's a lot of the principles that we're not addressing in this narrative. Well, maybe that's just a good example for you all to see, like, if I was coming to you and proposing that we do a new parking garage, there would be a lot of work. I'd have to, develop strategies for interpretation and, covering the whole history of the park in interpretation in some way at a parking garage. There's things that have to be addressed. So it was enlightening. I think it will be good for the designers moving forward.
And the assumption is yellow back.
So those colors are just assigned on a scale so you can look at it quickly, and the darker green means it did better, the lighter green, the yellows means it didn't do as well. That's not to say that if there was funding specifically from someone that it couldn't go forward. That is just how they rank against one another.
How many of them can it have back?
So as currently structured, anything that qualifies according to the guiding principles can be evaluated, but that score doesn't necessarily say anything about whether the project can go forward or not regarding how well it scores. If it meets the guiding principles, it's a project that could make sense within the park. So
What's the point then?
keeping in mind that the ranking, we've talked a little bit about a different process here when partners bring projects forward. Part of what we are charged with doing is creating a way to rank projects against one another for agencies that might be considering multiple projects. So that's where that.
So to your point, then, all of these would go forward. The garage would be the last one, ranked one.
No, the garage would not go forward because in this example, it doesn't meet the guiding principles at all.
Oh, okay. But all the other ones that do would go forward. They just would be ranked lower or higher.
Correct.
If it's for funding, if there was a private funder that came in and could fund it 100%, then it doesn't really matter.
as long as it meets the guiding principles. But I also think that we've created an expectation with the public about what these projects do as far as the design criteria. So sure, there might be a 100% funded project that would still meet a great deal of public opposition because it didn't approach things the right way. Okay, thank you again for your time and for the conversation. This was another really good conversation. If you've got thoughts about process, please send those to us. We'll put together information prior to our next meeting on the 9th.